overwhelm you with a couple of statistics, so I'm glad you're sitting down. And you probably already know them, and that's why you're here. And then Jim Kaster from the Financial Aid Office is going to talk specifically about financial aid strategies and how that system works. And then I'm going to close with just some ideas about some different investing and saving strategies. So first of all, there was a survey that was done back in 2009, surveyed parents of children who were preparing to go to college, and they found that 60% felt like they were strongly impacted by the current economic conditions in saving for college. And that was up 20% from 2008. So certainly 2008 had a huge impact on many families and what that means to them. Now, saving for college, as you know, is typically considered one of the top 3 expenses that a family will incur in their lifetime. First, usually their home, by paying for the mortgage, is the largest expense. But that, even though it's such a large expense, that is typically over a 30-year time period. Saving for retirement through 401ks and other planning is another big chunk of saving and investing experience. And then college. And one of the big challenges with college is that it's a very large expense, but over a short time period, so to speak. And then you will incur that expense. And we all know that tuition and fees and the expenses generally related to college are consistently higher than the Consumer Price Index. It's a measure for inflation. And we know that it's been much higher over a prolonged period. And the trend is that it's expected to continue indefinitely. There really is no end in sight for that. During that same time period, when we've seen the rising costs, the median family income has continued to go down. We also know, does anybody want to take a guess? We may have someone who has an older child, perhaps in the back, that might want to give a stab at this. In 1989 and 1990, that time frame, what do you think was the average tuition and fees for a public college, 89 to 90? Anyone have a guess?
5,000.
Oh, under that actually.
Wow.
For a public, 3,000. And this is a national survey, 2,936. That same time period, the average for a full-year private was about 15,000. Now, fast forward 20 years, from 2009 through 2010, an average 4-year public college tuition and fees about 7,000, so doubled in that time period. The average 4-year private, a little over 26,000. Now, of course, that doesn't include room and board, books, supplies, and travel expenses, pizza on Friday nights, and all the other things that go with college. So how are you going to pay for all that? What can you do? Certainly here at Washington and Lee, those on faculty and staff, depending on the year that you join the university, have a wonderful opportunity through the benefits program. Jim's going to just touch on that very briefly, and any individual questions you have about that can go through the treasurer's office. Other ways that people for expenses not covered by that look towards investment and savings, both the parents and the child. And we'll talk a lot about how there's a lot of difference between parents and grandparents saving and children saving, and the impact that can have on the financial aid process. Looking at current income, not only your own but your students. I'm looking at loans and grants and scholarships. Now, what's the best kind of strategy? 3 takeaways with this. Hope is not a strategy. It's something you can do. Wish you pray and think and hope, but that's not really a strategy. Not preparing is not a strategy. There are many who say, I'm just not going to do anything because that will really improve my chances for financial aid. I'm just going to do nothing. That's really not a strategy. On the other hand, we have those who are very disciplined, pragmatic savers, who are sometimes surprised at the end of the time when they see how, well, maybe that wasn't the best way to have focused. So what is a good strategy is to do exactly what you're doing, to come and to kind of get an idea of what is the best way that my saving, my strategy, the way my family situation is, what is the best way that I can plan around the financial aid system. and it is a system. And the best time to do that is before your child's senior year in high school, but if some of you have children who are seniors, it's not too late to don't look at that now, right? So you're all still seated, you're all still looking. So let me introduce our keynote speaker is Jim Kaster, who's here today. He is the Director of Financial Aid here at Washington and Lee. He's been the director you're in your first year now, correct?
A year and a half.
A year and a half, okay, replacing John DeCourcy. Prior to that, he was the Associate Director of Financial Aid for 8 years, and actually joined WNL about 11 years ago, was with the IT department for 2 years. Prior to Washington and Lee, he worked at DMI, and also taught in the local high schools, through the Roberts County School System at Natural Bridge and Roberts County High School. His background is in engineering and computers, with degree in education, degrees from the University of Florida and Virginia Tech. He's married with 3 children. He has a child in graduate school at the University of Denver, one who is in high school graduate preparing to go to college, and one who is wandering the world, currently in Harrisonburg. In talking with Jim, I commiserated with him having had a daughter who graduated in 2010 from Washington and Lee, who we had planned to go to William & Mary, so there was a large difference there. But certainly, just the increasing complexities of dealing within the system and working with families in the current economic environment is a challenging position. I think you've got a good person handling it.
In preparing this, I had to think of all the different variables that are going to affect it when it comes to this presentation, because everybody's going to be...
Speak up. Just
oh, you can't? Everybody's going to be expecting something different, because where your child goes to school, how much you've saved, what your income is, everything about the whole situation is going to affect how you prepare and how you are affected by the financial aid. There's kind of a sweet spot in there when it comes to financial aid. When Cathy's talking about savings, people that save and prepare and go into the college situation with everything ready find out that they're not eligible for any financial aid because they prepared, because they have a strong income, they have a strong savings, and they present that all to the financial aid office, and the financial aid office says, well, great, looks like you're ready to pay for everything here. And you walk away with thinking, well, why did I spend all my time saving? Because now now I don't get any of the benefits. But the reverse of that is you don't prepare, and then you come into your son or daughter's senior year, and suddenly you lose your job. And you don't have any income, you don't have any assets, you don't have anything. You walk into that financial aid office and they say, well, we can help you out a little. And now your son or daughter has very limited choices in where they can attend. So it's a tough situation when you try to encourage people to prepare, and you try to encourage people to understand the whole financial situation. We're not on your side. That's the truth. We're not working to make sure that we can just funnel money down towards you. Okay, we're working to make sure that we provide as much money for every student, that we take the money that we have and we use that money in a way that's equitable for every student, so as many students as possible can attend the university. So it turns out that some students who need it or want it aren't getting it, and some students that need it and really need it aren't getting enough. So it's a kind of a washed out money situation when it comes to certain universities. Now WNL, I have to say we're an exception. I mean, my job is easy. Okay, it's easy in a lot of ways because we have a good foundation. We have a good endowment. We have a lot of money that we can use to help bring students here. You know, doesn't mean it's in the same situation. Doesn't mean that you come into the university and you have $1 million income that we're going to offer you any aid. Okay, we still follow the same principles that every other financial aid office does because we still have a limit to the amount of money that we have. It's just that you'll go to some universities and you'll go to some schools and you'll start talking about what your need is, and they'll start talking about an amount of money that's much less than what you would expect that you could use to make it possible. And that's all they can give you. It's not that they're trying to be difficult, but that's all they have to offer you. So, going back to what I prepared here, I prepared this in general terms. So, in any way, as we go through this, some of it may be more complex than you want to hear, some of it may be much more simple than you want to hear. But any time as we're going through this, please stop me, ask me any questions you want. We're going on a track that seems to be a little interest, that we'll go through it fast. We're doing something that seems to have high interest, and we'll stop and talk about it. So I can't address all of your concerns, and especially if you're thinking about, like Cathy said, some of the W&L benefits. We're not going to address those concerns here. There are W&L benefits. If you've been here for less than 5 years, I think it is now, you get a 50% benefit for tuition. If you've been here for longer than that, you get a 90% benefit. I can tell you, that works really nice. Except if you go to school out of state, which my daughter did. Okay? So we get a 90% benefit on tuition, but what happens is some of those benefits, some of those tuition charges or things that are called charges are not covered by the W&L benefits. So you need to be aware of what's covered and what isn't covered when you start talking about the benefit. But we're not talking about W&L. What we're talking about is just the wide range application processes that are out there and the different requirements that different schools have when it comes to filing for financial aid. Some of the things that you should be aware of. What is financial aid? Financial aid is your scholarships, which are merit-based, which everybody can apply for and everybody can receive. Your grants, which are need-based, which only students that have need will receive. And then work, study, and loans. Okay, now, each of these may have a different process. Some of the scholarships may have a separate application. Some of the grants may have applications. And when it comes to federal, they all have the same application process, which is the FAFSA. Now, financial aid's not like, it's just like everything else. We've got our own terminology. There's all these different acronyms for things. The FAFSA is the main application process. And like I said, some of you may find this to be simplistic. If you've gone through a lot of this before, you recognize all these terms. But if it helps, I can speak through some of them if you find it very simplistic. FAFSA is the free form. Don't be confused by anything that requires you to pay for it when it comes to the FAFSA. FAFSA is absolutely free. You fill it out if you want federal aid. You will not be qualified for any federal aid unless you complete the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is essential for that. Some universities will require it. The CSS profile is an institutional form. So it is required by most institutions that have institutional money that they need to spend. Okay, so if you have grants or money that they have grants or money they want to give you, they're requiring a much more intense form like the CSS profile. Okay, that's controlled or owned by the college board, same organization as the SAT. So they create the profile, and it is a much more complex document. W&L requires the profile in order to be able to provide you with any need-based assistance. EFC, this is the one you're going to hear all the time. They call up the financial aid office, they're going to say, your EFC is $10,000. And you go, I don't know what that means. It's estimated family contribution. Now we're going to go in a little more detail, but that's basically the whole thing. What you can contribute to your child's education. It doesn't mean what you think you can contribute. It has nothing to do with that. Okay? You put aside in your budget, I'm going to contribute $2,000 a year to my child's education. The university comes back and says it's going to be $15,000. Okay? You don't get to converse about that. Right? That's the way it is. The feds will come up with one. The college, the profile will come up with another. The university may alter it in the end and pick out their own. Okay? But the EFC just means what somebody thinks your contribution is. Federal institution or college board. The federal, which is called the federal methodology, is whatever the feds use to come up with that number. Okay, and that's an old calculation. The institution is whatever that institution uses to come up with that number. And they could call you up and say, you apply to the college, and they call you up and say, okay, we now need your bank statements from 1920, from 1940 to 1960. And you go, I'm not giving you that. And they say, okay, well, we're not giving you any need-based aid. They can decide what it is they need in order to be able to determine what your institutional EFC is. So you have to, in some ways, insulate to the different universities, but you can also discuss it with them. COA is the cost of attendance, and I'll go into more detail about that also. That's the total cost of attending the school for 1 year. The need is the most important number, and that's the difference between whatever the cost of attendance is minus your EFC, your contribution. So they tell you what their cost of attendance is, they tell you what your contribution is, they tell you what your need is. So it's all determined by someone else. And then a few other just general terms. A non-custodial parent, if you happen to be divorced and you are the major support for your child, you are the custodial parent. Whether they live with you or not is not always the key factor. It's whether you provide more than 1/2 of their support. So they may be living with the other parent, but you're paying for all of their expenses. You are the custodial parent in terms of financial aid. Now you can decide that. You can tell the institution, I am the custodial parent, or this person is the custodial parent, and they may dispute it. Okay? Because you may submit the FAFSA as the custodial parent because you have the lowest income and say, I'm the custodial parent, I have the lowest income, I'm submitting the documents under my name, and it shows that I have much greater need. Then the university comes back and says, well, your spouse makes $340,000, pays for your home, pays for all the education, they're the custodial parent. We need their information. And they can do that. They can make that determination based upon the information that you provide. But you can initially make your own determination, and it may or may not be disputed. The NCP is part of the profile, so just in case you hear that, if you're applying to a private school, most likely they're asking for the profile, and if you are divorced, they will ask for the non-custodial parent to complete a portion of the profile separately. They're not attached to each other. They're only going to be completed by two different individuals and submitted separately so that information does not mix, and neither of those parents see that information. And that price calculator, just so you, the only reason I threw that in there is because you have the NCP and now you have the NPC. You'll hear that term too, which is a required software package that every university that receives any federal aid, meaning it can be aid that is used to build a building, they have to have a net price calculator. So you can go to any individual university and ask them where their net price calculator is. They need to tell you, you can go into that, you can complete it, and it will give you some information about how much it's supposedly going to cost you to go to that school. And I say supposedly, because on our net price calculator, we have 3 or 4 places where we say, this is an estimate, okay? This is not your award, because I've already had about 15 people call me up and say, the net price calculator said this, why did you offer me this? And I say, well, that's because you didn't tell us that you had a spouse that was making $300,000, or you had a business that was worth $7 million, or something like that. So the net price calculator is an estimate. The simpler your income and assets are, the more accurate that formula will be when it comes to that sort of thing. So again, you got to be careful about it. Yes?
Can I just go back to that?
Sure.
It's not as conservative.
Sure. That's bad.
So that, if you're divorced, it doesn't matter about another spouse. It's just one of the 2 biological parents who provides less than property.
It's biological parents. That's the key there, unless one of them has been
And
adopted.
that's only for private. That doesn't include the FAFSA.
It does have to do with the FAFSA, because as the FAFSA is only completed by the custodial parent. It does not
The
include.
custodial, in that case, is the living arrangement, not the financial.
It really, by definition, is the parent that supplies more than half of the support.
Okay, so really, it's all about that?
Yeah. So,
What does shot pepper and sweat?
really doesn't. Yeah, because the idea is that, you know, if you are living, if the child is living with you and but your spouse is paying a lot of support and is paying for most of the financial support for that child, then if you submit the FAFSA, you're seeing this income, where in fact it's being supplemented by this.
So if my ex-husband's a bum and doesn't pay very much, I'm the non-custodial parent. If I supply more.
No, you're the custodial. If you supply more, you're the custodial parent.
Right.
Yeah, the non-custodial supplies, that's.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I did that kind of negative.
Sorry, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Even if it's like 51 to 49%.
Well, you know, like I said, you can make the decision. You decide, I'm the custodial parent, okay? And you can pretty much, if your incomes are fairly similar, you can pretty much live with that, and no one's going to dispute it. But if you have a big discrepancy, which is what you usually see, someone submits an income of $30,000, they're living in a house of $500,000, something's going on there, and that's where a private school would be more concerned about. A public school probably wouldn't even see it, because all you submit is the FAFSA. They won't even see the spouse income. Because for a public school, they require only the FAFSA, that's only submitted by the custodial parent. They'll know you're divorced, but they don't know anything about the other person, because they don't request that information, nor does the federal government. Okay. Okay, so the principles of need-based housing. Now this is where we get down to the part where I said I'm not your friend, okay? Because I would like to be, but I'm just not, okay? Paying for the student's educational costs is the primary responsibility of the parent. This is the philosophy, okay? It is the primary philosophy. You go to a financial aid convention, this is all we want to know, okay? The primary responsibility of the parent is to pay for the education. We are a secondary. So if the parent decides, like, let me give you an example, you decide that you don't want to work anymore. Your child is a senior in high school and you're tired. You're 45 years old. You've worked for a long time and you don't want to work anymore. So you decide that you quit. Okay, I'm not working anymore. You come into the university, say, I have a zero income. I'm living off my retirement, which was $30,000 that I saved over these last 3 years. And the university will say, well, that's very interesting. You did have a $85,000 a year job, and now you don't have anything, and your student is starting college. What would you like us to do? And you come in and say, well, I'd like you to pay for it, because I don't want to work anymore. Well, that comes back to number one, the first law of financial aid. Paying for the student's educational costs is primarily the parent, and that's how a financial aid office will view it. If they have money, they will view it that way. If they don't have any money, they don't care, because they're not going to give you any money anyway. But if they have money, they will view it that way. And families are evaluated on their ability to pay. That goes back to the ESC. Not what you think your contribution is, but what your actual contribution is determined by those calculations. So it's based on ability to pay, not your willingness. And they're reviewed in your current situation. Now this is to your advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you do. This year is what the financial aid is going to look at when it comes to next year's aid. So how you finished up 2011 is how we expect you to continue through 2012. So if you made $180,000 this year, then we expect you to make $180,000 next year, and we're going to evaluate you based on that current condition. So if you lose your job in January or February, right after you file that FAFSA, you need to make sure they're aware, that's not my current condition anymore. I don't make $180,000. Not that you retired, but that you lost your job. So if it was an unwilling situation where you didn't quit your job willingly, you were laid off, something like that, if it was an unwilling situation, involuntary, then that's something you need to present to the financial aid office. And again, this is what I already stated. It's devised to be equitable. So even though you may not get as much as you think you should get, the ideas that we spread it around as best we can.
What if you were to receive a promotion or a new job and income goes up?
That's
Are
why,
you going to be held accountable?
yeah, that's why I said it's good and bad. It depends on what that university is doing. Most universities, and even our own, we won't see that until next year. So that's why a lot of universities will say, okay, you lost $2,000 this year, or you lost $10,000 this year. What do you expect to happen next year? So I'm going to get it back. So we're not going to do anything. We're just going to wait till next year, and we're going to see that change next year. So you don't need to tell the university that you got a $50,000 bonus. But that would not be a smart thing to do. Okay? You don't want them to know that. They'll find out next year, and then you won't get the grants that you had, the same chance that you had.
So is a sabbatical a voluntary reduction in salary?
Well, do you want me to know how I would see it, or how other
Because it
people
would
see
be
it?
2 years that your half salary would
Yeah.
show up on your tax return.
I'll tell you why I'm not friends.
That's why I'm asking the question.
If you came in to me and said that your child is a senior in high school and they want to come to Washington State next year, and you're taking a 2-year sabbatical, and it's a voluntary sabbatical because you thought it was a great time to do it, I would consider your salary what it was at the time you left, and not what it will be while you're in sabbatical. Because again, it goes back to number one. Now that would all, if you're applying to a university that uses only the FAFSA and doesn't require a lot of other information, and it's probably a university that doesn't have a lot of money, they would never know that. Okay? They would never know what your salary was and what it will be. So, yeah. In most universities where it's going to be an expensive university, they're going to ask you the question.
Timing question,
Sure.
talked about this before too, but when is the FAFSA due?
Well, it depends on what the university wants. Most universities will want, if they're using their FAFSA as their primary source, they want it early.
Early,
January 15th, February 1st, February 15th. I would say most of them, and that's a very
of the
important.
students, the year before the student goes, for the following year.
You'd be submitting it now so that they could attend this fall. You can't do it before January 1st, which doesn't make a difference now because it's past January 1st. But for any time in the future, you can't do it before January 1st. So if you're applying for the next year, January 1st is the first time, check the dates because you missed the FAFSA for a lot of schools. There's no need base there. None whatsoever. You can't do it that year. They may exclude you from any year for that. So be very careful about your deadlines.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
how does that play, how does that align with 81, 82 and normal admissions? I mean, obviously 81s are there, they know they're coming,
Right.
where normal admission doesn't happen until April, so you guys submit all this before?
It all depends. Okay, that's a good point, and that's something I'm not addressing at all, but I will address that. If you're applying for an 81 or an 82 or any early decision, there's going to be deadlines associated with that. And depending on how flexible the school is, they may have a deadline for 81 that if you miss it, you get no aid. It doesn't matter that the deadline for regular decision is later on. There may be an 81 deadline for 81 applicants. So they may have separate, we have separate, and we then are somewhat flexible, but we do tell some people, no, you're not going to get the aid because you missed the deadline. Because there's budgeted amounts for those specific number of students that are going at that time. So does that answer your question?
It was January 15th, did you submit the previous years? Because it's hard to get all everything ready.
You do an estimate. You do an estimate for 2000. If it's January 15th, you get your taxes out, you do as best you can, estimate what you put on there, and you say it's an estimate. Okay?
So, but you do what you do last year, so it would be better to estimate what you think.
You want to do 2011.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and you send that in, they know it's an estimate, they'll probably ask you to correct it later, but you've reached the deadline, if they know that some people aren't going to get their taxes done, still make it effective. All right, any more questions about that? I need to see how fast I'm going here, so. Okay, so we have till 1:20. So cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is not what you're going to be billed. And so I'm going to put that down. Don't confuse this with your bill. You're going to be billed whatever the university sees as their charges. That's tuition, that's fees, if your son or daughter's living on campus, that's the room, and if they're getting a meal plan, that's the meal plan. Okay, they're not going to charge you for miscellaneous, you're going to have to pay for books, and there's also some other transportation. So we call cost of attendance all of it. So when you're thinking about where you want to go, don't just look at what they say their bill is. Don't look at tuition room and board. Think about how much is it going to cost you to get over there. Are you going to be traveling back and forth? My daughter went to Florida, and I didn't even think about the cost related to traveling back and forth and staying down there. That was probably, another $5,000 in the end. I mean, it was a lot of money in order to be able to go back and forth between there. So one of those things to consider is how much does the total cost of attending this college cost? They may come up with a number, and that's the number they're going to use. You can dispute that number at some point. If your child lives in a room off campus, or there's a cost related to a computer, you can go to the financial aid office and you can say, it's costing us this, or you only allowed us this, and give them documentation, and they will change the cost of attendance if you have documentation. It doesn't mean that they're going to give you more grants, but it's possible if you hit them early enough. A lot of schools, you hit them with any changes as early as possible. If the grant's there, they're given to you. You hit them in July, it doesn't matter what you do, they don't have any more money left. Okay?
So you're saying that if you can identify an increase in cost of attendance early on, it might affect the level of aid that you get from that school?
Yes,
Okay.
it might. Yeah. And a lot of things, like you say, oh, my child's buying a computer and it wasn't part of the cost of attendance. They'll say, that's great. Here's an additional loan to pay for it. Okay, they may not give you any sort of grant. They may just say loan. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give you anything, but it is important. So, just an example. This is what you can kind of expect as your cost of attendance. You're not going to be billed for transportation, miscellaneous, or books, but you will be billed for most of these things up here. So your expected family contribution is contribution from the parent plus contribution from the student, and that's the entire family contribution. So that's the amount that you're expected to contribute. One of the things that affect that, your income is the major thing. Now I'm going to get into this later, but just in case I forget, I just want to go ahead and say it now. Income is the major thing for parents. Assets are a percentage. For most, it's around 6%. So you have, some money set aside in your name. About 6% of that is going to be used as part of the contribution. Now, that's the parent. You look at the student. We see the student as any dollar the student has is money they save for education. So if that student has $100,000 in their bank account, in my mind, they have $25,000 a year that they're going to use for education. So right off the bat, for 4 years, I don't care if they spend it all in the first year, they've got $25,000 a year. So putting money in a student's name as part of your educational savings is the worst idea you could ever have. Okay? So, and it happens, and people think it's the smartest thing they ever do. I created this account for Joe, and I put $250,000 in there, and now you're saying you're not going to give me any aid. How is he going to go to grad school? Well, that's not my concern.
And grandparents as well.
I'm sorry?
A lot of grandparents will do that.
A lot of grandparents. They create the account in the student's name, and they say, I'm going to put this money in there. And it's just a sad situation. I feel bad for them, but it's the way it is.
529 accounts apply to that? Or does that apply to 529?
Yes.
Well, yes, it depends on how you create it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to
If
create
it's
it.
in my name for benefit of,
Then you own it.
okay.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you talk to your expert on that when it comes to creating those savings accounts. And you can't do a lot of things about trusts that were, trusts that were created by a grandparent, and then the grandparent dies or something like that, and that trust was created in the daughter or son's name. There's nothing you can do about it. It's there. It's in their name. I've had people that come in and they were given the son or daughter was in an accident. I think it was the daughter that was in an accident, and they received this settlement. And it was a very large settlement. Part of it was for paying for the cost of medical. The rest of it was for education. Even the settlement was defined that way. Well, initially I saw it all as money, that was used for education. They came back and talked about the medical issues, and then I allowed part of that not to be used. So you can discuss it with your financial aid person, and you can explain things about it. Doesn't mean they're going to do anything. Okay, I could have said, no, it's in their name, I'm using it all, that's allowed. I could do that, it's my money, I can decide, it's not my money, it's the university's money, I can decide how I want to use it, okay, so you have to live with that. But it doesn't mean you can't talk to them and explain to them situations so that they may understand it better. And also the age of the parent, let's do that.
Can I ask?
Yes, absolutely.
So for the student, it's about assets and not income, because all the things you're discussing are assets, they are not.
Well, your students don't usually have any income.
Right, yeah.
They work during the summer, and I am going to talk about that again, but it's a good point to bring up now. They work during the summer, they make some money. Let's say they make $2,500, that's contribution for that year. They're not going to make $20,000. They're not going to make any real money. And most universities will assume a student is going to make money whether they do or not. So we expect that the student is going to spend their summer earning money for education. And if they don't, that's their loss. We've already taken $2,000 off. We expect to have, we use $1,400, which is nothing. But we expect them to earn $1,400 to bring it to school and use it for education. So whether they have any assets or anything else, that's the student contribution. It's $1,400. A lot of schools will do that. So income is still dollar for dollar, but it's just not very much.
Is $1,400 pretty much the going expectation?
I think it ranges around $1,400 to $3,000.
You just automatically insert that and don't ask for proof.
We ask for proof. We look at their income first, and if it's less than $1,400, it's $1,400. If it's greater than $1,400, it's whatever it is.
So the $1,400 cannot be, if the student works all summer with the idea that they're saving this money, they're making this money to use it as spending money. That's not how you guys, that's not.
No, it is spending money, but it's
It's like that pizza and coffee money.
well, it's $1,400 that they are bringing, and it's part of their cost for attendance. So it goes back to these miscellaneous personal, that $1,660. We assume that they're going to pay for that themselves, but it comes off the cost of attendance, thus reducing the need, thus reducing the amount of need-based grant that they'd have available.
If your child is a full-time student over the summer day classes, would that then be an assumption that they couldn't work?
It depends on the university.
Okay.
Almost every individual that I know in financial aid has an automatic student contribution expectation. So even if the student decides to go to school during the summer, there's still the expectation. But again, that does not eliminate you from going in and talking to your financial aid advisor and saying, here's the full-time schedule, when were they supposed to work, and why do they have a student contribution when they have no income? It's never wrong, as long as you don't go in with your fist slamming against the table. If you come in nicely and tell them the truth, the facts, I think a lot of people will understand that. Yes.
What about stocks and students?
Any asset in a student's name is available for educational costs, including retirement funds. If you put a retirement fund in your student's name, that's just a way of taking funds that could have been used for education and putting them someplace else. Why would the university, and I'm telling you from my perspective, why would the university think that we're going to finance your son or daughter's retirement account with need-based aid? Because that's what we're looking at in terms of how I view it, or how most financial aid partners do.
When is the right time to have a conversation with the financial aid office?
Well, there's different times, always initially early, to find out what you should be doing. And then once you have submitted your information, to find out if you have submitted all your information. And once you have received the response, if you're not happy with it, immediately go in and talk about
Like
that.
December, if you're applying for the January FAFSA?
Okay,
is
I expect people to call me in September
September?
of the senior year. I
Okay.
expect those conversations. And so people that call me in January, are
A
really
little late.
on the edge. Yeah, they can still get what they need, but they're really pushing it at that point. So September's a good time to find out what you should be doing. October, November are also good. After that, you're starting to get into where it's already happening.
So in theory, if your child were to apply 5 schools, you'd be calling 5 financial aid offices. Is that the?
That's the smart thing.
That would be the smart.
Yeah.
That just seems like so much work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but you gotta think it's an investment. Think of it as you're making money. If you get that need-based grant, you're making some money. That's a good thing.
So if you get a package award, is it true that like even an intermediate student is never going to get actual cost of attendance as an award?
Well, okay, let's you.
Assumptions about like miscellaneous,
Well, I think WNL is the most generous school that I know of. Okay, if a student came in with 0 contribution, we would still give them work study because we think everybody should contribute in some way or another, and the rest would be grants. So a neediest student will get, from most universities, almost everything paid for, and they may have to earn the rest of it with some couple hours a week of work, which I don't think is unreasonable at all. That means they're just paying for their miscellaneous costs and maybe some of their books. So yeah, that, I don't know of too many need-based grants that would cover the absolute full cost of attendance. Most of them have some work study in there. Some merit could. There's few merit awards out there that could cover anything you can think of, plus summer, plus anything. So there are awards that do cover anything, and that doesn't mean you're needy.
so your package could be more than your actual bill.
It will be in cases of needy students. And many needy students that go to WNL receive awards that are greater than what they're billed, and they have a credit they can then take out and use for their books. Or they can charge against. And a lot of universities will do that for the neediest students.
To follow up on the previous question about conversations with, if your child is applying to 5 different schools, talk to 5 different officers, do those conversations differ between public and private institutions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're going towards that direction now, but that's definitely public universities are very limited and less flexible, where private are much more flexible depending on the finances of that university. So publics are on the whim of the state and the federal government. As they vary, so does the university. So what they have to offer can be very limited. So you can call them up all you want, and they can tell you the same thing. We don't have any money. We don't care what you say. We don't have any money. It's a useless conversation sometimes, but most of the time there's somebody who can at least talk to you about something. The larger your university is, the more difficult it will be to talk to a person. But don't give up on that. I talk to the financial aid people at the University of Florida, and I don't know how many, 60,000 people, how many people down there. But it's a gigantic school. You just know you have to call, get the right numbers, and then you just keep that number because that's the number you're going to continue to call.
What is the conversation talking about having the Washington tuition benefit? Is that going to be FAFSA?
Okay, well, let's think of that in terms of any scholarship you receive. Any scholarship you receive is money that is yours. So it doesn't come from the university that you're going to. It comes from some other source. We're not talking about university. We're talking about some outside source. That's like your money. So it's like student money. So it's as if the student earned that as income. Universities will view that differently, depending on what that is. If it's a merit scholarship that you're receiving, and your son or daughter goes to school and you have no need, it comes in and it's great. If you have need, then it could completely wipe it out. Okay, like a lot of times the benefit will. It can wipe out all of your need, thus you're not eligible for any need-based award, or it can be done in different variations. We do a 50-50 split when it comes to outside scholarships, when it comes to need-based awards. So it really depends on the university. I would talk to them ahead of time. You don't have to tell them who you are. Just tell them, I've got this benefit that's going to give me $18,000. How's that going to affect my need-based award if I receive one from the university? And they should be able to tell you that. But it's good to know ahead of time because that's one of those things that, I think I'm getting $32,000 and in the end you only get $18,000.
Just and I don't want to make that my situation, but for those of us who have multiple children who are in university, how do you, just broad scale, how do you look at that?
Yeah, that's where I was I was up to that one right there. So we're back to where we were. So number in college, that's a good one. Okay, it's good and bad. It's good for you in the sense that if you time your children right, you make the most money. Okay? Did you do good? 2 in college, 3 in college. If you get 4 in college at one time, you're really going to get the jackpot. They all have to go to private schools. We send them all to private schools, and you're in good shape. Now, if you send them to public schools, again, it may not help so much. But the general idea is 60% or 50%, depending on the university. So we use 50%. If you have 2 in college, we divide it by 2. So if we said your contribution was $20,000, now it's $10,000. So your grant just went up $10,000. Okay, and so it's a very good benefit. And when that changes, that goes away. So you have it in there for 2 years. The 3rd year, one of your children graduates. Now you have less grant because now you don't have that benefit any longer. Now, when it goes to 3, we divide by 3. Some use a different scale. Some will actually look at the college that your other children are attending and compare the cost of that school to their school. So if your child was attending W&L, this is not what we do, but I'm just using this example. If your child was attending W&L and your other child was attending, let's say Radford, that's a fairly inexpensive school. Let's say Radford costs $6,000, W&L costs $55,000. We would say there's no comparison, so we're not really going to reduce your cost of attendance. We're only going to give you a small break. W&L doesn't do that. We do 50-50. We don't care what the other school costs. We do 50-50. But other schools will look at that, and they may say, okay, yeah, your contribution is $30,000, and you're going to Radford over here, which is only $6,000, so we'll give you $1,000 off. So we reduce your contribution by $1,000. So they use a percentage there. So the more children you have in college, the better. Twins are the best.
So what children have is like all of them in college, or you have younger ones at home, does that make any difference?
Yeah, it makes a difference. It makes a difference in the terms of that you have children coming up, and if they're attending some like private schools or there's expenses related to them, you do want to report that to the financial aid office. Let them know we have these costs associated with these children. They're going to take into account the number of children you have, and it is going to reduce your contribution. But it's not a matter like you can go in the office, well, 3 years from now I got this kid coming to college. Well, yes, you do, but it's not going to help you now. So badly spaced children are not good. So if you just get one every 4 years, that is the worst situation you can have, because it's not going to help you in any way whatsoever. It's just numbers then. It doesn't really do anything. And I'm sorry. And the last thing is that if you are, I don't see anybody that has, if you're like 70 and you have children going to college, age of parent can make a big difference. And I chose 70 because that's around the retirement age. Now, if you're in that, there's 2 things you benefit from. One is it's part of the calculation. It does reduce your contribution by having one of the parents elderly, okay, in the upper ranges. Okay, that does help. And the second is you can retire. Okay, we would accept it if you retired at retirement age and no longer had an income, even if it was the year in which your student started college. It's a reasonable thing to do. Even if we go back to the first principle of financial aid, it's still reasonable to expect people to retire. We would then use their retirement benefits as part of their income, normal stuff like that, but we wouldn't count their income. So that's a good argument to make. You're ready to retire, you tell them I'm retiring, and it's legitimate. Now, so I don't know if anybody's in that situation.
Jim, can I just go back to the asset question again? So anything that has, aside from the kids, whatever in the parent's name, property, stocks, IRA, all of that or not?
Again, you're talking between public and private universities. Private will ask you for anything they can. I will go and research the history of your house. So you can tell me it's worth $300. I'll go on to Zillow and find out what it's really worth. Okay. So we really are concerned about everything. Public, it depends on the school. How interested they are in you and how much time they have to do it. They're going to be busy. They're going to most likely take whatever you put down there. And if you consider certain things not assets, and if they don't ask you the question, don't answer it. Okay, I mean, it's not lying, I'm not encouraging you to lie. If they don't ask you about your other real estate, or they don't ask you about the value of a business that is not specific to what the FAFSA says, then you do not need to volunteer that information. They'll ask you enough questions. They'll find out about most of the information, or most of the assets you have. So they will ask you about businesses that are at a certain level. They will ask you about your assets, and they'll define what those assets are. And so you need to go ahead and answer that question.
And then in your calculations, it's a percentage of that total that you consider part of the employment contribution.
Yes, in all calculations, the asset is a percentage. So you take the total amount of assets, we take deductions off these things, which are called allowances, and they're part of just the normal calculation, and then we take a percentage of what's left.
And I actually have, we'll give to you on the way out, a handout that has some of that information and compares the child and the parent to that. It has 2010, 2011 info, but it's still in that range.
So I'm going to have to go through here so we can give you a couple
You're all
minutes to
right,
talk
you're
there.
all right.
So back to the, financial, we get to this, cost of attendance minus your expected contribution is your need, okay? So need varies depending on the school. So some people say, well, I went to public school, I didn't have any need. That doesn't mean you're not going to have need if you come to Washington Lee. It doesn't mean you're needy. It just means you have need. I mean, some people get this stigma about, I'm a needy student. Well, almost everybody that comes to WNL, at least 60% of them, are needy in that definition. You have need based upon the cost. If the cost is $100,000 and your contribution is $80,000, which is tremendous, you still have need of $20,000. Okay? So it's all relative to what the cost is. You take that estimated payment contribution, you subtract it from whatever the cost of that university is, what's left is your need. So the larger the cost, the more your need. So the types of aid we talked about there, the grants or needy scholarships are merit. And what the different programs will offer, institutional programs will offer you grants. They'll offer you institutional loans, they'll offer you work study. They'll offer you scholarships for non-need-based. They'll also offer you work study that's not need-based. And they have other special programs like resident assistant, that sort of thing. States, normally, the only thing a state has is a need-based grant or a non-need-based grant. Most of this other stuff usually doesn't exist. So, and there's very few grants when it comes to the state. Federal, they have a lot of stuff out there. But unless you're at the low income level, you won't qualify for any grants. You have to be at a low income level or have a lot of students in school. So again, it can help you. The Pell Grant is very limited. It only helps you really if you're going to a school that's not very expensive, because it's about $5,000, $500 maximum that you can receive for the Pell Grant. It's based on the cost of that university, if your student's full-time, and your income. So Pell Grant, SEOG, very low-income students. There are no other grants that the federal government will offer you for attending a university. You get tax breaks on the back side of it, but on the front side, that's it. So everything else, even though it says need-based, for these, this money you're going to have to pay back except for work study. You're going to earn work study. You have to pay back the Perkins, you have to pay back the subsidized loan. They're both interest-free while your child is in school, and they have a deferment period after they get out, where they don't have to start paying it back, and they have 10 years to pay it off. But it's still money they have to pay back to the university, or back to the government. All these other ones, they have to pay, they will be charged interest while they're in school. You can receive a loan, a Parent Plus loan. Parent Plus loan is kind of a secret. It's not a great secret. It's not one of those secrets you find, you go, oh, yay. You find it, you go, oh, that's great. You know, it allows you to pay for school, but it's a lot of interest. It's 8% interest. You have to start paying it back while your kids are in school. You can get the full amount, whatever's left, whatever wasn't covered by everything else, you can get it in the Plus loan, but that just means you have a lot of debt. Okay? And it's easy to get. Unless you're bankrupt, you can get it. Okay, you qualify for it. So it's very, when the credit requirements are pretty low. So the federal money that you get is just not that great. So you really want to concentrate more on the institutional money. Federal money, it's there, you're always going to get it, they're always going to offer you loans, and you can work with that, but it's not going to really get you through school unless you're going to take on debt. You get debt from all sorts of places. So feds aren't always the best place, but. So again, I just want to go through these real quick there because I'll get time to some of the other stuff. You have to qualify low income. The SEOG is the same. It's low income students, whether the school has that money or not. It's the school. It's provided to the school to give to students, so they have to have it. Subsidized loan, it's limited amount, $3,500 for first-year students, not very much to help you get through anything. And then federal work study, Perkins loans. You can always, I'm going through these fast, and people might have any answer to questions about it. And then plus on staff. Okay, what can you expect? Well, depending on the school that you go to, you can expect to receive institutional grant, federal grant if you're low income, loans, and work study. That's what you should expect. That's what they will offer you. Almost every university, if you have any type of need, will come back with some type of institutional grant. They still are trying to get you there. And the better your student is, the more likely they're going to want that student to come there, and the more they'll recognize maybe some need that they didn't see before. Okay? There is flexibility in there, and a lot of universities will say, oh, yeah, we didn't realize that you had this additional need, so now there's this amount of aid available. So it's available for negotiation. You know, it's out there. It's not like buying a used car. I mean, some parents come to me and they say, well, what about this, what about that? And I tell them, I say, you know, we're not trying to buy your son or daughter's attendance here. We want to make it possible for them. And if you can explain to me why it's not possible, then maybe I can change my understanding of what you submitted. So that's the way you want to approach it. Let them know it's not possible because of this. This is what prevents me from accessing these funds that you say I should be able to access. Now, could you reevaluate it and make it possible for us? That's a good approach. You come in and say, you know, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing. That's not a good approach, because you got to remember, that person is the one that's going to continually fund your son or daughter for the next 3 or 4 years. So it's always good to be on the nice side of that situation. So outside organizations, states, you're on your own. No one's going to come to you and say, would you like this scholarship? You've got to work for those. So the state's not even going to do it. So, you know, if you've got if you're one of those PSAT finalists, great, you're going to get a National Merit Scholarship, but not every school is going to even honor that. So you have to be careful about it. You have to be aware of what those outside organizations offer. So on your academics, you have great opportunities if the school offers merit aid. We were talking about Williams. They don't offer merit aid. So you can be the most outstanding student in the world, but if your school does not offer merit aid and you are not needy, you're not going to get an award. And you can't go to a school and say, well, my student is outstanding. Why aren't you getting an award? We only offer need-based awards. Well, they're outstanding, though. It makes no difference. Okay, so recognize what that school will provide you. If you already determined that you're attending this university and your income places you outside the realm of need, but you're not going to be able to attend that unless you get a scholarship, make sure you know if they have scholarships. Make sure if it's even worthwhile for your kid to apply, because that can be pretty tough. They apply, it's the school they want, they get admitted, now you tell them they can't go. Yes?
Is there a conversation between the financial aid office and the admissions office about kids filling buckets they're trying to fill?
Well, let's go forward, because I think that's that's the next slide here.
Okay.
Public versus private. You know, I'm talking about what the public's going to offer you. Public's offer you this limited amount of stuff. Financial analysis is strict. They can make changes. That's professional judgment. There's flexibility, but not very much. It's restricted by regulation. The need is based on the FAFSA. The private universities, they use other forms. They have institutional grants available. They're more abundant. Need can be based on all sorts of different documents. Much more flexibility. But financial analysis is very strict, okay, because they're using their own money. So you're talking about maybe need blind, okay? Universities, these are some terms to know. When a university says they are need blind, That means that there's no communication between the admissions office and the financial aid office. That means that you apply for aid, and it makes no difference what your need is. Admissions is admitting you on your qualifications, then they are telling the financial aid office who they admitted, and then you are being funded. That's basically how WM works, most of the time, okay? To the very end. Okay, we're very honest about this. We don't tell people we're need blind. We're need sensitive. So need sensitive means need sensitive means that we do that almost all the way up to the end, and at the very end, when we're getting people off the wait list, we do look at what their need is because we don't have any money left, and that's where you're. So you ask the school, does it make a difference if I apply? But I think that's a question that it doesn't matter. Why bother asking them? Because you can ask the question, does it make a difference whether I apply for aid, whether I'm going to be admitted? If you need money to go to that school, that question is moot. Because if you don't apply, you're not getting any money. And if you apply and they don't admit you because you have need, because they weren't going to give you any money, that's okay because you weren't going to be able to go there anyway. So you might as well apply to any school you want to go to that you feel that you can basically afford, see what they give you if they admit you. And if you try to play the game where you're not going to apply until after you get admitted, you'll find in most cases they're not going to give you any money. Because we admitted you with the idea that you didn't apply, or we admitted you and spent all our money. Either way, we don't have money to give you at this point here. So don't use it as a reason for not applying, but it's always okay to know what's going on with it. And that, a few other, I know I'm running late here, so we'll see how fast I can get through the rest of these. But your full need met means that the university will go ahead and meet your need with need-based aid. It doesn't mean grant. They could provide you with need-based loans. But full need met, that's what it means. So keep that in mind too. If they say we will meet 100% of your need, that doesn't mean they're going to give you 100% dollars. That means that they're going to give you need-based aid. Work studies need-based aid. Stafford loans are need-based aid. Institutional loans are considered need-based aid if they're 0% interest. So that's not really that great all the time. No loans, though, that's different. No loans means not that they're not going to offer you any loans. It just means that they're not going to offer you loans to meet your need. So that means they're going to give you grant or maybe work study to meet that need. Now, obviously, they're not going to, if you have a need of $50,000, they're not going to give you $30,000 of work study. Okay, it's not, unless they're going to hire you in a salary position. So you can expect the work study. So that's a great situation. You know, if you find a school that says no loans, they admit you and you have a need, you're going to be in really good shape. You're going to get a good sized grant. And the public schools, what we have now, and a few privates that suffer from it, is the federal government is in such bad shape when it comes to money. They're pulling back money that they set for education. Graduate students no longer eligible for subsidized loans. So if you have any students going on to grad school, they won't get subsidized loans any longer. That could disappear for undergraduate students. The Pell Grant could reduce. The grace period after students graduate could disappear. All of that are trends towards what the federal government is doing now. So all issues that should be of your concern if you're going towards that. Now, just real quickly, I'll go through these last things. You can see on a normal public school that the federal government makes up a percentage of the grants here. Federal grants make up about 14%. That's the public school. And then loans make up a larger part. If you go to a private school, typical private school, this is the grant portion here. And the federal grants are these small little things here. Okay. So you see that you're much more likely to receive a grant at a private school than you will at a public school. But keep in mind, I don't want this to be a misconception. It costs a whole lot more to go to private school. Okay? But it can be a lot less expensive. Look into those. Even if you think that, oh, I can't afford it, look into them anyway. With the W&L benefit, with need-based aid, with other incentives that a lot of private schools offer, you can find private schools that are much less expensive than public schools. So best advice, apply. This is the last slide, then I'll just go through the rest of them, and we can talk about anything else if you want. But what should you do? Review the application requirements for each school. Like we were talking about, call them early, find out what the application requirements are, what you need to submit. You need to submit tax returns. Find out when the deadlines are, especially for scholarships, if you have scholarship deadlines. And what does the website tell you about their program? Okay, does it say other information you need to know? And who do you call? I think that's really important. Don't forget about calling. You know, why not? You're spending the money here. You should be able to call and talk to somebody. You shouldn't have to talk to a recording or leave a message. You should be able to talk to somebody. And create a budget for each of these schools. Be realistic about what it's going to cost you. We're talking about transportation and going and staying someplace. You know, it costs money to do all that. Be realistic about your costs. The total cost, not cost of attendance as they tell you, what you think the cost of attendance will be. And then whether or not you will need a grant to make it possible. Again, I go back to the same thing. Talk to your child about what you can afford. If you can't afford to send them to the school unless you receive this type of grant, let them know. Before they apply and get admitted that you need a $20,000 grant for them to go to this school. And if you don't get it, they can't go. Show them the budget, you know, so they're prepared ahead of time. And be realistic. You think you're going to get that $20,000? If you don't, you might want to talk about that too. So that doesn't turn out to be a problem. And then, you know, always, you know, we'll talk about that work study options so you know this, if your child's going to earn it. And summer earnings, you know, earning $5,000 during the summer really is beneficial because it might not necessarily affect your need-based aid, but it will help in paying for the cost of the school. So I have a lot more slides here, but I'm just going to go through these. You know, there's also, I'll make this PowerPoint available to everybody. So, but it just talks about how you fill in some of the forms, what you're going to need, and then, you know, some of the supplemental forms. You know, talks about some private resources, and be careful about paying for scholarships. Don't ever submit any payment except for the CSS profile, which does cost money. Everything else should be free. If you have to pay for a scholarship, don't do it. Don't pay for the FAFSA, don't pay for scholarships. It's a scam. Get an award letter, just an example. This is an R award letter. Just an example that, you know, they may offer you $10,000, your need maybe $12,000, the total cost maybe $15,000. You know, keep in mind that they may not be showing you all of the award options. They may just be showing you the need-based options. So there may be other options out there that you want to talk to them. And if you have special circumstances, anything that comes up at any time, talk to them. You call them early. Don't assume that the person you talk to in September is going to remember who you are. You call back and go, hey, this is Jim again, and they go, yeah, you know my child. They don't have any idea who you are. Okay? So tell them again what your situation is, send them a letter, attach that letter to every document you send. Keep going until you get a response to whatever your circumstances are. It's not wrong to work towards getting the best deal you can, because that's what you're working for there. You know, financial aid's not working against you, but they're not working for you. You need to work for you. We're work in terms of what's equitable. Okay? So we do what's right to do as best we can. You need to state your case as this is what's right for me, so that we can understand it. Think of us as stupid. We don't understand your situation. Talk to us as if we don't talk to us as if we're stupid. Talk to us as if we don't understand. Okay? That makes it better. And so, you know, do not hesitate to provide them a list of any of the information, and don't be afraid to negotiate. Now, I know Cathy is, I'm sorry to
No, I think great information. I'm going to let you all go. We're going to just, Barbara and I have the handouts we'll give you. I just had some more information related to 529 plans. It has some of the charts and things that Jim has gone over. And I'm certainly available anytime anyone has an individual question, or if you'd like to sit down and talk, I'm happy to do that as well, because it is complex. The other thing I did want to mention, in addition to the partnership with the financial aid office at the University of Choice or the 5 universities, it's also a partnership with your student. And the last thing they want to be talking about their junior and senior year in high school is, what are you interested in again? And what did you get on your SATs and all that? So I encourage you to help your student in that organizational process. And just, you'll find that when you begin to apply for these things, they ask you the same kind of information, but in different kinds of ways. And so just keep tracking of that. I had a notebook that I used throughout my daughter's junior and senior years. And it was very helpful. And so she did what she had to do, and I did the basic grunt work of it. And it ended up being a great partnership that way. So good luck to all of you in this process. We wish you well.
And before everyone leaves, we have taped this. We're going to put this on our website. And with Jim's permission, we'll add the PowerPoint.
That'd be
You will get
great.
an evaluation. If you'd like more information, because I didn't realize how much information there was to share. And I apologize to Kathy, she didn't get to do the 529 plans. If you want to have a follow-up session on the evaluation, indicate that, and we'll plan another one to
It
maybe
might be
follow
good
up.
to go in more detail on those
Yeah,
second
just-
floor.
And also, if there's any time that anybody has any questions about financial aid, feel free to give me a call or send me an email so I'll be happy to answer.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.